We're streamlining, Samuel, making the department leaner, more agile. Your role, after 36 commendable years, has become, well, redundant in a new structure. We need to make way for fresh talent, a more digitally native approach. Clean out your desk by the end of the day. Human resources will have your final paycheck and severance details ready. The words, delivered with the practiced indifference of a man who'd likely memorized them from a corporate memo, came from Marcus Thorne, the newly appointed vice president of operations at Sterling Precision Works, a company I had poured more than 3.5 decades of my life into. He was all of 35, with an MBA from a school I couldn't pronounce and a haircut that probably cost more than my weekly grocery bill. He sat behind the vast, polished expanse of what used to be old Mr. Sterling's desk. The founder, a man who knew every employee by name and every machine on the factory floor by its particular hum. My name is Samuel Croft, 61 years old, and until that Tuesday morning, I was the head of specialized tooling and calibration at Sterling Precision Works, a position I'd held for the last 22 of my 36 years with the company. I was the man who ensured that the components leaving our facility were machined to tolerances measured in microns, parts that went into everything from aerospace guidance systems to life-saving medical devices. My department was the quiet, meticulous heart of Sterling's reputation for unparalleled quality. Redundant. The word hung in the air-conditioned chill of Thorne's office, as out of place as a cracked gear in one of my finely tuned calibration units. I looked at Thorne, at his expensive, non-iron shirt, his perfectly knotted tie, the faint sheen of condescension in his eyes as he awaited my reaction. An outburst, perhaps? A plea for reconsideration? An old man's tears? He was to be disappointed. I simply nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. Understood, Mr. Thorne, I said, my voice even, betraying none of the sudden, cold clarity that was settling within me like perfectly tempered steel. I'll have my personal effects cleared by 5. He blinked, a flicker of surprise, perhaps even disappointment, in his eyes. This wasn't the script he'd anticipated. Good, he said, recovering quickly, his tone brisk now, eager to move on to the next item on his agenda of corporate evisceration. Brenda and HR will handle the paperwork. Standard severance, of course, as per company policy. I didn't bother to correct him, didn't mention the rather non-standard clauses in my original employment contract, the one signed by old Mr. Sterling himself, a document Thorne had clearly never bothered to unearth from the company archives. A document that stipulated rather specific and significantly more generous terms for termination without cause, especially for an employee within 6 months of full retirement eligibility. My retirement, with its full pension and benefits package, was due to commence in precisely 4 months and 7 days. A detail Thorne, in his digitally native agility, had either overlooked or, more likely, deliberately ignored in his zeal to make the department leaner. As I walked back to my small, windowless office, a space I'd occupied for so long it felt like an extension of myself, the news hadn't yet rippled through the department. My team, a dedicated group of 8 highly skilled technicians, men and women I had personally trained, looked up and smiled as I passed, their faces reflecting the usual mid-morning focus. How would they manage without my decades of accumulated knowledge, the undocumented workarounds, the intuitive understanding of machines that whispered their ailments only to a seasoned ear? That, I supposed, was now Mr. Thorne's problem to solve with his fresh talent. I began the grim task of packing. 36 years. It was a lifetime. Old photographs of company picnics, my children's crayon drawings taped to the side of a filing cabinet, a collection of oddly shaped metal shavings that represented particularly challenging projects overcome, a tarnished silver cup awarded for outstanding contribution to quality control, 1998. Each item a small, tangible piece of a career spent in pursuit of precision, of excellence. What Thorne, in his MBA-fueled arrogance, didn't understand was that Sterling Precision Works wasn't just a collection of machines and processes. It was a repository of institutional knowledge, of hard-won experience, much of it residing not in digital files or operations manuals, but in the minds and hands of its long-serving employees. People like me. In the specialized tooling and calibration department, my department was its most critical and perhaps least understood component. We didn't just make parts. We made the tools that made the parts. We designed and maintained the unique, often proprietary, calibration systems that ensured Sterling's output was not just good, but perfect. Much of this knowledge was unwritten, passed down from mentor to apprentice, a legacy of skill and intuition. My old contract, the one gathering dust in some forgotten archive, the one penned by a founder who valued loyalty and experience above all else, contained a clause, a rather beautifully anachronistic golden handshake provision for long-serving senior staff terminated without egregious cause, particularly if such termination occurred within a year of their vested retirement. It stipulated a severance equivalent to 3 years' full salary and the immediate vesting of all pension and retirement benefits, as if I had completed my full term. Old Mr. Sterling had a deep-seated belief in fairness and a healthy skepticism about the fleeting wisdom of new brooms. He'd once told me, after a particularly aggressive young executive had tried to restructure his way to glory, "Samuel, always remember, the gears of business may turn on profit, but the oil that keeps them from seizing is loyalty and experience. Never let anyone tell you otherwise, and make sure your own gears are well protected." I had taken his advice to heart. The contract was my protection. As I placed the last of my personal items into a worn cardboard box, a box that had seen me through 3 office moves within the company, I felt not despair, but a cold, hard resolve. Marcus Thorne had made a critical miscalculation. He had mistaken quiet dedication for obsolescence, experience for redundancy. He had failed to do his due diligence, failed to consult the archives. And in the world of precision engineering, such oversights invariably lead to catastrophic system failure. My retirement was indeed about to commence, but not, I suspected, on the leaner terms Mr. Thorne envisioned. The final calibration of my 36-year career at Sterling Precision Works was about to be performed, and it would be, I vowed, a masterpiece of precise and entirely justified financial reckoning. He wanted fresh talent. He was about to discover the true cost of discarding seasoned expertise just before it crossed the finish line. The walkout of Sterling Precision Works that afternoon was a surreal experience. Colleagues I'd known for decades averted their eyes, murmuring awkward goodbyes, their faces a mixture of sympathy and a daunting, fearful realization that if Samuel Croft, a man synonymous with the company's quality, could be so casually discarded, then no one was truly safe under Thorne's new regime. Brenda from HR, a woman I'd once helped untangle a particularly nasty payroll error that had shorted half the factory floor, handed me my final paycheck and a slim folder with the standard severance details, her expression apologetic, her eyes not quite meeting mine. I accepted them without comment. The weight of the old cardboard box in my other hand, a poignant counterpoint to the thinness of the folder Thorne deemed sufficient compensation for nearly 4 decades of my life. Driving away from the familiar red brick building, a place where I'd spent more waking hours than in my own home for so many years, I didn't feel anger. Not yet. That would come later, I suspected, a slow burn rather than a sudden conflagration. What I felt was a strange, almost detached, sense of clarity. The kind of clarity that comes after a complex diagnostic procedure, when a fault has been identified and the necessary corrective actions, however drastic, becomes starkly apparent. My first call, once I was settled back in my quiet, empty house, my wife, Martha, having passed away 3 years prior after a long illness, was not to my children, not yet. It was to Eleanor Vance, a solicitor whose reputation for meticulous preparation and tenacious litigation in employment law was legendary in our city. Eleanor and I had a history of sorts. Years ago, her small engineering firm had been a supplier to Sterling, and I had been instrumental in helping them resolve a critical quality control issue that had threatened their contract. She had never forgotten it. Samuel Croft. Eleanor's voice, crisp and professional, came over the line. To what do I owe the pleasure? Or, given the hour and your tone, I suspect it may not be entirely a pleasure. I explained the situation concisely, factually, laying out Thorne's pronouncement, the 36 years of service, the proximity to my full retirement, the standard severance offer. Eleanor listened without interruption, a skill I had always admired in her. When I finished, there was a brief pause. "Marcus Thorne, you said?" she asked. Mid-30s, recent MBA, favors Italian suits and aggressive restructuring. "The very same," I confirmed. "Ah, yes," Eleanor said, a note of dry amusement in her voice. "His reputation precedes him. He's left a trail of streamlined and subsequently struggling companies across 3 states. Tell me, Samuel, did you by any chance retain a copy of your original employment contract with Sterling Precision Works? The one signed by old man Sterling himself, perhaps around the time he made you head of department?" My heart gave a small, almost imperceptible leap. She remembered, or rather, she knew the kind of man old Mr. Sterling was, the kind of protections he might have put in place for his key people. "As a matter of fact, Eleanor," I said, allowing a small smile to touch my own lips, "I believe I have that very document safely filed away, along with several subsequent amendments, all confirming its continued validity." "Excellent," she said, the amusement in her voice now more pronounced. "Could you possibly have that couriered over to my office first thing in the morning? And any correspondence related to your impending retirement, your pension statements, that sort of thing. I have a feeling Mr. Thorne's standard severance is about to become remarkably non-standard." We agreed to meet the following afternoon. After ending the call with Eleanor, I retrieved the worn manila folder from the fireproof safe in my study. Inside, nestled amongst old performance reviews and commendation letters, was the contract, its paper yellowed with age, but its typewritten clauses still sharp and clear. And there it was, Section 7, Paragraph B, Subclause 3, in the event of termination of employment by the company without just cause, as defined in Appendix A, of any employee with more than 25 years of continuous service, and within 12 months of said employee's declared and documented eligibility for full retirement benefits, the company shall be liable for a severance payment equivalent to 3 times the employee's current annual salary, payable as a lump sum, in addition to the immediate and full vesting of all accrued pension, health care, and other retirement benefits, as if the employee had completed their full term of service up to and including their official retirement date. Old Mr. Sterling, a man who had built his company on the bedrock of loyalty and craftsmanship, had indeed protected his own. He had understood that institutional knowledge, the kind that couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet or streamlined by an MBA with a fancy haircut, was a true lifeblood of his enterprise. He had also, it seemed, possessed a remarkably prescient understanding of the potential for future, less enlightened management to undervalue that very asset. The next morning, as I prepared the documents for the courier, I received a call from Sarah Evans, one of my brightest young technicians in the calibration lab, a woman I had mentored for the past 5 years. Her voice was hesitant, almost fearful. "Mr. Croft? Samuel? Is it true? What Mr. Thorne announced in the department meeting this morning? That you've retired early?" So, Thorne hadn't even had the decency to be honest with my team. Retired early was his spin. "Not exactly, Sarah," I said gently. "My departure was rather more abrupt than that. Let's just say Mr. Thorne and I have different views on the value of long-term experience." There was a silence, then Sarah's voice filled with a new anxiety. "But who's going to manage the recalibration for the new aerospace contract? The specs are incredibly tight, and the custom jig you designed, no one else fully understands its nuances." "Kevin, Mr. Thorne's new department head, the one he just hired from that software company? He was in here earlier asking questions that, well, frankly, sir, they scared me. He doesn't seem to grasp the tolerances we're working to." Kevin. So that was the fresh talent. A software guy in a department that lived and breathed micron-level mechanical precision. Thorne's agility was already demonstrating its flaws. "I'm sure Mr. Thorne has a plan, Sarah," I said, a touch of irony in my voice that I hoped she wouldn't detect. "He's a great believer in new approaches. New approaches aren't going to help if those turbine blades are 1/100th of a millimeter out of true, Mr. Croft, she said, her voice tight. That's a multi-million-dollar engine, and potentially lives at stake. She was right, of course. The responsibility we carried in my department was immense. The precision we achieved was not a luxury. It was a fundamental requirement. And it was built on decades of accumulated knowledge, of painstaking refinement, of an almost intuitive understanding of the materials and machines we worked with. Knowledge that Thorne had just casually tossed out the door, deeming it redundant. The thought of Kevin, the software guy, attempting to oversee the critical calibration for an aerospace contract, using tools and processes he clearly didn't understand, sent a genuine chill down my spine. This wasn't just about my contract, my severance, my retirement. This was about the integrity of the work itself, the reputation Sterling Precision Works had built over half a century. And Thorne, in his arrogant ignorance, was putting all of it at risk. My meeting with Eleanor Vance that afternoon couldn't come soon enough. The gears of this particular mechanism were now fully engaged, and the initial readings were indicating a catastrophic failure was not just possible, but increasingly probable under Thorne's leaner, more agile leadership. Eleanor Vance's office was a haven of calm, understated competence, a world away from the aggressive, faux modern aesthetic Thorne had imposed on the executive suite at Sterling Precision Works. Books lined the walls, not just legal tomes, but works of history, philosophy, even poetry. A testament to a mind that appreciated nuance and context, qualities notably absent in Mr. Thorne's operational playbook. Eleanor greeted me with a warm, firm handshake. "Samuel, good to see you, though I wish the circumstances were more auspicious. Coffee?" "Yeah." We settled into comfortable leather armchairs, and she got straight to the point, her sharp legal mind already dissecting the documents I had couriered over that morning. "Your contract, Samuel," she began, tapping the yellowed pages of the original agreement, "is a beautiful piece of work. Old man Sterling was no fool. This Section 7, Paragraph B, Subclause 3, she paused, a small, appreciative smile playing on her lips, is what we lawyers like to call an ironclad son of a bitch. Forgive my French. Thorne clearly never read it. Or if he did, he didn't understand its implications. Or perhaps he simply assumed you wouldn't have the temerity to enforce it. He seemed rather fixated on the standard company policy, I observed, which, as you'll see from their current employee handbook, a document Brenda from HR so thoughtfully included in my redundancy package, stipulates a rather paltry 2 weeks pay per year of service, capped at 26 weeks. A significant difference from 3 years, full salary and immediate, full pension vesting. Eleanor chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Indeed, a difference of, let me see, roughly $680,000 in severance alone, not to mention the accelerated pension and lifetime healthcare benefits. Mr. Thorne's attempt to streamline your departure is about to become a very expensive exercise in corporate due diligence, or rather, the lack thereof. She then outlined her proposed strategy. A formal letter to Thorne and Sterling Precision Works Board of Directors, asserting my rights under the original contract, demanding immediate rectification of the severance offer, and pointing out the rather significant legal and financial repercussions of their failure to honor a binding agreement. "We won't threaten litigation immediately," she explained. "We'll give them an opportunity to see the error of their ways, to understand that this is not a negotiation from a position of weakness on your part, but a simple statement of contractual obligation on theirs." However, her eyes hardened slightly. "We will also make it clear that we are fully prepared to pursue all available legal remedies should they choose to be recalcitrant." Recalcitrant. I had a feeling Marcus Thorne was about to provide us with a textbook definition of the word. "In the matter of your impending retirement, Samuel," Eleanor continued, "the timing of your termination, just shy of your full eligibility, is suggestive. It could be construed as a deliberate attempt to avoid paying your full pension and benefits. That, in itself, carries significant legal risks for them, quite apart from the contractual breach. We discussed the situation Sarah Evans had described in the calibration lab, Thorne's ill-suited replacement, Kevin, and the looming aerospace contract. This is more than just a contractual dispute, Eleanor. I said, a note of genuine concern in my voice. If they mishandle that calibration, the consequences could be severe, not just for Sterling's reputation, but potentially for public safety. Eleanor nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. That is a complicating factor, Samuel, and a deeply troubling one. While our primary focus must be on your rights and your contract, the potential for negligence on their part, particularly if it can be linked to your wrongful termination and the subsequent loss of critical expertise, could strengthen our position significantly. It demonstrates a reckless disregard not just for their employees, but for their operational responsibilities. She made a note on her legal pad. I'll need a detailed account from you, Samuel, outlining the specific critical processes and undocumented knowledge within your department, the potential risks associated with an inexperienced or unqualified individual attempting to manage them, and the specific concerns regarding this aerospace contract. We won't use it aggressively, not yet, but it's a very powerful card to have in our hand, should they choose to play hardball. I spent the next hour detailing the intricacies of my department, the years of accumulated knowledge, the custom-built calibration rigs, the subtle, almost intuitive adjustments required for certain high-tolerance components. I explained the rigorous, multi-stage validation process for the aerospace turbine blades, a process I had personally designed and overseen for the past 15 years. As I spoke, I saw Eleanor's eyebrows rise on several occasions. Samuel, she said when I had finished, it's clear that your role was not just redundant. It was absolutely mission-critical. Thorne hasn't just fired an employee. He's effectively decapitated his company's entire quality assurance nervous system. The man is an astonishing combination of arrogance and incompetence. The formal letter from Eleanor Vance, ESQ, landed on Marcus Thorne's desk 2 days later. I imagined the scene with a certain grim satisfaction. Thorne, perhaps in the middle of another PowerPoint presentation on synergistic agility or paradigm-shifting lean manufacturing, being handed a crisp, legally worded demand for a sum that would likely make his eyes water and his quarterly budget implode. The response, when it came a week later via Sterling's corporate counsel, a large, impersonal firm Thorne had clearly brought in to replace old Mr. Sterling's more traditional local solicitors, was a masterpiece of dismissive legal bluster. They acknowledged receipt of our letter, dismissed my original contract as outdated and superseded by current company policy, reiterated their generous standard severance offer, and cautioned us against pursuing frivolous and vexatious litigation. Eleanor read it to me over the phone, a note of barely concealed amusement in her voice. Well, Samuel, she said, it appears Mr. Thorne has chosen the path of recalcitrance. As predicted, shall we prepare our formal response, and perhaps begin to assemble the supporting documentation for that rather interesting aerospace contract you mentioned? By all means, Eleanor, I replied. It seems Mr. Thorne is about to receive a practical demonstration in the difference between streamlining and derailing. The game was now truly afoot, and Thorne, blissfully unaware of the full arsenal of contractual obligations and potential negligence claims we were preparing to unleash, was speeding headlong towards a very expensive and very public system failure. My only regret was that old Mr. Sterling wasn't around to witness it. He would have appreciated the irony and the meticulous, if somewhat reluctant, application of the very protections he had so wisely put in place. The legal chess game initiated by Eleanor's letter and Sterling's dismissive response played out over the next few weeks with a predictable, if frustrating, series of maneuvers. Thorne's lawyers, clearly operating under his arrogant assumption that an old man and his yellowed contract were no match for their corporate might, engaged in a strategy of delay and obfuscation. They requested extensions, questioned the authenticity of my contract, a claim quickly debunked by Mr. Henderson's original archive copy, which he graciously provided to Eleanor, and even tried to argue that my 36 years of service somehow constituted an acceptance of evolving company policies that implicitly nullified older agreements. Eleanor, with her characteristic blend of steely resolve and meticulous preparation, countered each move with calm, factual precision, her responses invariably highlighting the unambiguous language of my contract and the rather glaring deficiencies in their legal arguments. Meanwhile, reports from Sterling Precision Works, relayed to me through Sarah Evans and a few other old colleagues who still dared to communicate with me discreetly, painted a picture of escalating chaos within the specialized tooling and calibration department. Kevin, Thorne's hand-picked digitally native replacement, was, by all accounts, floundering spectacularly. Accustomed to the forgiving tolerances of software code, he seemed utterly unable to grasp the unforgiving, micron-level precision required in our world. He'd reportedly tried to optimize several of my carefully calibrated diagnostic routines by rewriting them with a new software patch, only to discover that the patch introduced subtle errors that threw off the entire system. The custom-built jigs and fixtures, which I had designed over years to accommodate the unique geometries of certain critical components, baffled him. He'd even, according to one horrified account from Sarah, suggested replacing one of our most sensitive laser interferometers, a hugely expensive piece of equipment, with a more cost-effective 3D scanning solution he'd seen at a tech expo, demonstrating a fundamental misunderstanding of its purpose and capabilities. The aerospace contract, the one for the turbine blades, was rapidly approaching its critical deadline for initial sample submission. The client, a major international aerospace conglomerate, was notoriously exacting, their quality control standards legendary. Failure to meet those standards would not just jeopardize this one contract. It could damage Sterling's reputation across the entire industry. Sarah called me one evening, her voice tight with anxiety. "Samuel," she said, it's a mess here. Kevin had us rerun the calibration sequence on the first batch of turbine blades 3 times. Each time, the readings were inconsistent. He's blaming the equipment, blaming us, blaming everything but his own lack of understanding. He even tried to manually adjust the primary calibration rig this afternoon, using a printout from a generic online engineering forum as his guide. I had to practically physically restrain him. Thorne is breathing down his neck. The client is calling every day, and frankly, Samuel, I'm terrified we're going to ship out a batch of dangerously flawed components. Her words sent a genuine chill through me. This was no longer just about my contractual rights or Thorne's corporate hubris. This was about real-world consequences, about safety, about lives. The thought of those turbine blades, potentially compromised by incompetence and arrogance, finding their way into an aircraft engine, was unconscionable. I immediately called Eleanor. "Eleanor," I said, "we need to escalate. The situation at Sterling with the aerospace contract, it's becoming critical. I have credible information that they are on the verge of a major quality control failure, potentially with catastrophic consequences, directly as a result of my termination and their subsequent mismanagement of the department." Eleanor listened intently as I relayed Sarah's concerns and my own deep-seated fears. "This changes the calculus, Samuel," she said, her voice grim. "This moves beyond a mere employment dispute. If we have evidence of potential negligence that could endanger public safety, we have a responsibility to act. It also, regrettably for Sterling, provides us with considerable leverage." Her next move was a masterstroke. She drafted a formal letter, not to Thorne or his corporate lawyers, but directly to Sterling Precision Works Board of Directors and, crucially, to their primary liability insurers. The letter, couched in carefully objective legal language, detailed my wrongful termination, the subsequent dismantling of experienced oversight in a mission-critical department, and our grave concerns regarding the potential for a catastrophic quality failure on the upcoming aerospace contract, citing specific examples of mismanagement relayed by current employees, anonymized, of course, to protect Sarah and others. She attached a summary of my qualifications, a history of my successful management of the department, and a carefully worded offer. I was prepared on a strictly temporary and without prejudice basis to return to Sterling Precision Works for a limited period, solely to oversee the final calibration and validation of the aerospace components, to avert a potential disaster. This offer, she made clear, was contingent on an immediate and satisfactory resolution of my contractual severance and retirement claims, as previously outlined. It was, in essence, a rescue offer, but one with a very clear and very firm price tag. The effect of this letter, Eleanor later told me, was akin to dropping a lit match into a barrel of particularly volatile solvent. The board of directors, many of whom were old associates of Mr. Sterling and had a vested interest in the company's long-term reputation and their own potential liabilities, were reportedly horrified. The insurers, faced with the prospect of a multi-million-dollar claim and a public safety scandal, immediately began asking some very pointed questions of Sterling's management, namely, Marcus Thorne. Thorne, I imagine, found himself in a rather uncomfortable spotlight, his leaner, more agile approach suddenly looking like reckless, potentially catastrophic incompetence. The bluster from Sterling's corporate counsel ceased abruptly. Their next communication to Eleanor was a request for an urgent, in-person meeting to discuss all outstanding matters. The tide, it seemed, was turning. My quiet, meticulous dedication to quality, the very thing Thorne had deemed redundant, was about to become Sterling Precision Works' most desperately needed, and now, most expensive, asset. The irony was as precise and unyielding as any calibration I had ever performed. The urgent meeting convened 2 days later in Eleanor Vance's conference room. The atmosphere was a stark contrast to our previous, more adversarial encounters. Marcus Thorne was present, of course, but his usual arrogant swagger was noticeably absent, replaced by a pallor and a hunted look in his eyes. He was flanked not by his previous team of corporate blusterers, but by 2 senior partners from Sterling's original, more conservative, local law firm, the firm old Mr. Sterling had trusted for decades. Also present, much to Thorne's visible discomfort, were 2 members of Sterling Precision Works' board of directors. Mr. Alastair Henderson, no relation to my solicitor, a coincidence that had caused some initial confusion. The retired former CFO and a close friend of my late founder, and Ms. Harriet Albright, a formidable businesswoman with a reputation for zero tolerance for incompetence. It was clear that the board, and quite possibly the insurers, had taken Eleanor's letter very, very seriously. Eleanor began the meeting by calmly reiterating our position. My 36 years of unblemished service, the clear and unambiguous terms of my original employment contract, the wrongful termination just months before my full retirement, and the subsequent, entirely inadequate severance offer. She then, with a chilling precision, summarized our grave concerns regarding the aerospace contract, referencing the specific calibration protocols I had designed and the documented instances of recent mismanagement within the department since my departure. Mr. Henderson, the former CFO, listened intently, his expression grim. Ms. Albright's gaze, when it rested on Thorne, was glacial. Thorne himself remained largely silent, occasionally muttering a weak defense or attempting to shift blame to his new team's learning curve, but his protestations lacked any conviction and were largely ignored. Mr. Thorne, Ms. Albright finally interjected, her voice cutting through his latest excuse like a diamond drill through soft steel. It has become abundantly clear to the board that your restructuring initiatives in the specialized tooling and calibration department have been, to put it mildly, catastrophically ill-advised. You have not only exposed this company to significant legal and financial liabilities regarding Mr. Croft's contract, but you have, more alarmingly, jeopardized a multi-million-dollar contract, and indeed, the entire reputation of Sterling Precision Works, a reputation built on half a century of unwavering commitment to quality. A commitment Mr. Croft here has personally embodied for nearly 4 decades. Thorne visibly shrank under her gaze. The senior partners from Sterling's old law firm then spoke, their tone one of weary pragmatism. They acknowledged the validity of my contract, conceded that the initial severance offer had been an unfortunate oversight, and expressed their clients, the board's desire to rectify the situation and mitigate any further damage. The negotiation, if one could call it that, was remarkably swift. There was no real argument about the terms of my contract. The 3 years full salary severance, the immediate vesting of my full pension and lifetime healthcare benefits. These were now accepted as foregone conclusions. The only point of contention was my offer to return temporarily to oversee the aerospace contract. Thorne, in a last, desperate attempt to salvage some shred of his authority, argued against it, claiming his new team was on the cusp of a breakthrough. Ms. Albright silenced him with a single, withering glare. "Mr. Thorne," she said, "your team's breakthroughs to date appear to have consisted primarily of breaking established protocols and nearly breaking very expensive machinery. Mr. Croft's expertise is not requested. It is at this juncture mandated by this board, and I might add, strongly advised by our insurers." And so it was agreed. I would return to Sterling Precision Works for a period not to exceed 30 days, with a clearly defined mandate, to oversee the final calibration and validation of the aerospace turbine blades, and to train a designated successor, Sarah Evans and my quiet assistants, relayed through Eleanor, to ensure continuity of critical processes. For this, I would be compensated at a senior consultant's daily rate that made Marcus Thorne visibly choke. My contractual severance and retirement package would be processed immediately, irrespective of this temporary consultancy. As the meeting concluded and the various lawyers began to confer on the precise wording of the settlement agreement, Mr. Henderson approached me, his hand outstretched. "Samuel," he said, his voice filled with a quiet respect, "on behalf of the board, and as a friend of your late founder, I want to apologize for how you've been treated, for the short-sightedness that led to this entirely avoidable crisis. Old man Sterling would be spinning in his grave if he knew. He always said you were the bedrock of this company's quality. Turns out, he was, as usual, absolutely right." I shook his hand. "Thank you, Alistair. That means a great deal." Ms. Albright also offered a curt nod of acknowledgement. "Mr. Croft, we expect results, and we expect a full report on Mr. Thorne's operational competence, or lack thereof, upon the conclusion of your consultancy." Thorne, who had been hovering miserably in the background, looked as though he might actually faint. My return to the specialized tooling and calibration department the following Monday was interesting. Thorne had been conspicuously absent, reportedly attending an urgent off-site management seminar. Kevin, the software guy, looked both relieved and terrified to see me. My old team, however, greeted me with undisguised relief and, in Sarah Evans' case, a heartfelt hug. "Thank God you're back, Samuel," she whispered. "We were about to start sacrificing small gears to the god of precision engineering. We had less than 2 weeks to salvage the aerospace contract. The task was daunting, but not impossible. The calibration rigs, thankfully, were not irreparably damaged by Kevin's ham-fisted interventions. The turbine blades, however, were another story. The first batch was a write-off, their tolerances hopelessly compromised. We would have to start again, from scratch, working around the clock. But as I stood once more in my old domain, surrounded by the familiar hum of precision machinery and the focused dedication of my team, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't realized I'd missed. This wasn't just about fulfilling a contract. It was about restoring integrity, about upholding a standard of excellence that had been carelessly, arrogantly, almost fatally discarded. The old man was back, and he had work to do. The fresh talent could wait. They had a few things to learn first about the enduring value of seasoned expertise. The next 30 days were a blur of intense, focused effort. My old team, reinvigorated by my return and Sarah Evans's quiet, competent leadership under my guidance, worked with a dedication that was nothing short of heroic. We meticulously recalibrated every piece of equipment, revalidated every process, and began the painstaking work of machining and testing the new batch of aerospace turbine blades. Kevin, Thorne's ill-fated replacement, was quietly reassigned to a special projects role in another department, a corporate euphemism for being put out to pasture until a more permanent solution for his employment could be found. He seemed almost relieved to be free from the crushing responsibility he had so clearly been unequipped to handle. Marcus Thorne himself remained conspicuously scarce. He made a few brief, awkward appearances in the department, his usual arrogance replaced by a kind of forced, nervous deference whenever I was present. He'd ask vaguely about progress, nod curtly at my concise, factual updates, and then beat a hasty retreat, clearly uncomfortable in a domain where actual demonstrable competence, rather than buzzwords and PowerPoint presentations, was the currency of value. My interactions with him were minimal, professional, and devoid of any personal animosity on my part. The situation itself was a far more eloquent commentary on his failings than any words I could offer. The real challenge lay in the turbine blades themselves. The client specifications were among the most demanding we had ever encountered, requiring tolerances that pushed the very limits of our machining and calibration capabilities. But this was what Sterling Precision Works, under old Mr. Sterling's and my own decades of guidance, had been built for. This was our specialty, our niche, the reason clients with mission-critical, high-stakes components came to us. Sarah Evans proved to be an exceptionally quick study, her sharp mind and meticulous attention to detail making her a natural successor. She absorbed the complex, often unwritten, nuances of the calibration processes with an intensity that reminded me of my younger self. I spent hours with her, explaining not just the how, but the why behind each step, passing on a legacy of knowledge old Mr. Sterling had once entrusted to me. The deadline for the initial sample submission to the aerospace client loomed. We worked through weekends, late into the nights. The hum of the calibration rigs a constant soundtrack to our efforts. There were setbacks, moments of frustration, times when a micron-level deviation threatened to derail days of work. But the team, my old team, pulled together, their shared experience and unspoken understanding a powerful force. Finally, with less than 48 hours to spare, we had a batch of 10 turbine blades that met, and in some cases exceeded, every one of the client's extraordinarily stringent specifications. The final validation reports, run and rerun, confirmed it. They were perfect. I personally oversaw the secure packaging and shipment of the samples, a sense of quiet, profound satisfaction settling over me. We had done it. We had pulled Sterling Precision Works back from the brink of a catastrophic failure, a failure precipitated entirely by Thorne's arrogant mismanagement. My 30-day consultancy period concluded the day after the samples were shipped. I submitted my final report to the board, a concise, factual account of the work undertaken, the successful outcome, and, as requested by Ms. Albright, a rather damning, if diplomatically worded, assessment of the operational deficiencies and lack of requisite expertise that had led to the crisis. I also included a strong recommendation for Sarah Evans's permanent appointment as head of the Specialized Tooling and Calibration Department, citing her exceptional performance under extreme pressure. My departure this time was very different from the last. There was no furtive packing of a cardboard box, no averted gazes. Instead, the entire department gathered, Thorne conspicuously absent, to wish me well. Sarah presented me with a small, beautifully machined brass plaque, engraved with the words, "Samuel Croft, the standard of excellence. With gratitude from your team." It was a simple gesture, but it meant more to me than any 3-year severance package. As I walked out of Sterling Precision Works for what I knew would be the final time as an employee or consultant, I felt a sense of closure, of a job well done, of a legacy preserved. My retirement, so abruptly and unceremoniously initiated by Thorne, could now begin on my own terms, with my contractual rights fully honored, my pension and benefits secured, and my professional reputation not just intact, but arguably enhanced. The following week, Eleanor Vance called me. "Samuel," she said, a note of unmistakable triumph in her voice, "I thought you'd like to know. The aerospace client received the turbine blade samples. They were, and I quote their chief engineer, flawless, exceeding all expectations. The contract is secure. Sterling's reputation is, for the moment, salvaged." "That's excellent news, Eleanor," I said, a genuine smile spreading across my face. "And Sarah?" Sarah Evans was officially appointed head of department this morning, with the full backing of the board. "It seems your recommendation carried considerable weight." "Good," I said. "She earned it." And one more thing, Samuel, Eleanor added, her voice now laced with a familiar dry amusement. Marcus Thorne submitted his resignation late yesterday afternoon, citing a desire to pursue new strategic opportunities elsewhere. The board, I understand, accepted it with alacrity. It seems Ms. Albright's report on his operational competence was rather persuasive. So, Thorne was gone. His leaner, more agile approach had led him directly to the exit. The irony was not lost on me. My 36 years of service, my accumulated knowledge, my unwavering commitment to quality. These were the things that had ultimately saved Sterling Precision Works from the consequences of his arrogant ignorance. These were the things old Mr. Sterling had valued and had so wisely sought to protect. My retirement, now officially underway, felt different. It was no longer a looming deadline, but an open horizon. I had my financial security, my health, and a profound sense of a career brought to a just and honorable conclusion. The fresh talent had had its moment. Now it was time for the seasoned expertise to enjoy a well-earned rest and perhaps to find new, less stressful ways to calibrate the intricate mechanisms of a life well lived. The gears, at last, were running smoothly. My retirement, when it finally, officially commenced, was a quieter affair than the dramatic preceding months might have suggested. There were no grand farewell parties, no gold watches, though the brass plaque for my team held a place of honor on my mantelpiece. Instead, there was a simple, profound sense of peace, the quiet satisfaction of a long and demanding project brought to a successful, if unexpectedly turbulent, conclusion. The severance payment, as stipulated in old Mr. Sterling's prescient contract, arrived as a lump sum, a figure substantial enough to ensure that my retirement years would be comfortable, free from financial anxiety. My full pension and lifetime healthcare benefits were also, as agreed, immediately vested. Marcus Thorne's ill-conceived attempt to streamline me out of my hard-earned dues had, in a spectacular display of corporate irony, resulted in me receiving a far more generous and immediate settlement than if I had simply worked my remaining 4 months and retired under normal circumstances. Eleanor Vance and I had a celebratory lunch to mark the occasion, a quiet affair at a discreet old restaurant that old Mr. Sterling himself had favored. To foresight, Samuel, Eleanor toasted, raising her glass, and to the enduring value of a well-drafted contract and an even better calibrated engineer. We chuckled, a shared acknowledgement of the peculiar battle we had fought and won. The news from Sterling Precision Works, in the months that followed, was one of gradual stabilization. Sarah Evans, by all accounts, was doing an excellent job as the new head of specialized tooling and calibration. She had the respect of the team, a deep understanding of the processes, thanks in no small part to our intensive 30-day collaboration, and, crucially, the full backing of the board, particularly Ms. Albright, who had become something of a mentor to her. The company had learned a hard and expensive lesson about the true cost of undervaluing experience and institutional knowledge. The fresh talent approach, at least in critical, high-precision departments, had been quietly shelved. I spent the first few months of my retirement simply decompressing. I worked in my garden, a passion I'd long neglected. I reread old favorite books, visited my children and grandchildren more frequently, and even, to my own surprise, took up bird watching, a hobby that required the same patience and keen observation that had defined my professional life, but with far less stress and significantly more pleasant scenery. One afternoon, about 6 months into my retirement, I received an unexpected call. It was Alastair Henderson, the retired CFO from Sterling's board. "Samuel," he said, his voice warm, "I hope I'm not disturbing your well-earned leisure. The board has been discussing a new initiative. We're establishing a small, independent quality assurance oversight committee, reporting directly to us, to provide an objective, experienced eye on critical manufacturing processes across all departments. Serve an internal auditor for quality, if you will. And your name, not surprisingly, was at the very top of our list of desired candidates." He went on to explain that it wouldn't be a full-time role, more of a consultancy, perhaps a few days a month, attending meetings, reviewing protocols, offering guidance. Frankly, Samuel, he concluded, after the Thorn debacle, we realized we need someone with your depth of experience, someone with an unshakable commitment to precision, to help us ensure that such a near catastrophe never happens again. The remuneration would be commensurate with your expertise, of course. I was silent for a moment, considering his offer. The irony was not lost on me. The man deemed redundant was now being invited back, in a position of even greater influence, to safeguard the very quality standards he had spent his life upholding. Alistair, I said finally, a slow smile spreading across my face, I believe my schedule might just have an opening for such an interesting calibration project. On a strictly part-time, consultative basis, of course. My birdwatching commitments are rather demanding these days. And so, in a strange, full-circle kind of way, I found myself re-engaging with Sterling Precision Works, but on my own terms as an independent, respected advisor, a guardian of the old standards, a mentor to the new generation. Marcus Thorne, I heard, had eventually landed a mid-level management position at a plastics manufacturing firm in another state. His dreams of agile restructuring and lean operations presumably now applied to the production of garden gnomes and disposable cutlery. Kevin, the software guy, had quietly resigned from Sterling and gone back to his world of code, hopefully with a newfound appreciation for the unforgiving nature of mechanical tolerances. My story, I suppose, is a quiet testament to the enduring value of experience, of dedication, of the kind of deep, institutional knowledge that can't be easily replaced by a fancy degree or a disruptive new buzzword. It's a reminder that true precision, whether in engineering or in business, requires more than just fresh talent. It requires seasoned judgment, a meticulous attention to detail, and an unwavering commitment to getting it right every single time. Old Mr. Sterling had understood that.